All right, welcome to Social Selling Hour, hashtag SS Hour on this August 18th. We're happy to be here. Hopefully you're joining us here on Google Plus Hangout as well as on the Twitter chat. Today we are glad to have a guest. We've had, I think, 3 guests in a row, so we're being blessed with some great guests that I can say Rachel and I are honored to have so many great guests that are willing to spend some time with us. And so today we have Andrew Jenkins join us today, kind of talk a little bit about programs and really some of the social selling things that we really haven't, I'd say, gone too in depth or overkill on as of these previous chats. So I'm excited because it's a refreshing new topic for our community. So, and of course, we're here with Rachel, who's not only running the backside of this, but also on the Twitter chats as well. So make sure you say hi and follow Rachel, of course. Hi, Rachel.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
All right, so before we get on to question one, Andrew, just give us a little bit of background about yourself for those of you that aren't familiar with you, your background as well as kind of what we'll be talking about today.
Sure. I'm Andrew Jenkins. Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to share some thoughts on social selling. I lead the social selling practice for our company, or ARC for short, and have been in the technology space for almost 20 years. I was an e-commerce pioneer. I started my own e-commerce company selling menswear on the internet in 1995. That was before Google and before taking credit cards over the web was as common as it is today.
I learned about that stuff in history class, I believe.
That's been a short book. So I've been in the technology space ever since. And for the last 7 or so years, have been focused on social media and social media strategy, working with mid to large enterprises, and social selling being one of the areas of focus.
Very cool. Well, we're glad to have you here. I've been following you on multiple social platforms for a while now, and so I enjoy your insights and kind of views not only from the history on some of the topics and social selling as a whole, but I think so much of social selling seems to be brand new, and being able to reference and kind of talk about things that aren't as brand new of wins and ways you can use things that have worked in the past to work in the social selling space, I think is powerful information for our community for sure. So we'll go ahead and jump into question number one. So we have what are the main differences between a social selling workshop and a social selling platform or program? I'm sorry.
Well, the workshops tend to be shorter periods of time. It's kind of a content delivered in chunks. There's Q&A either at the end or throughout. It tends to be intended for exposing people to social selling rather than practical application. That's where programs and more practical approaches to it, where people have the opportunity to do a bit of work with it in between the modules. That's why a program stretched out over a particular period of time can have some benefit. Workshops still serve their purpose, exposing people to social selling for the first time in some cases, to be a refresher if they've had a program or workshops in the past and now there's some new material worth updating them about. For instance, in the last 2 weeks, well, I should say 3 weeks, LinkedIn has introduced a revised mobile app, an entirely new mobile app called Connected, and has made some dramatic changes to their platform with the introduction of the new Sales Navigator. So there's a lot of change happening very, very quickly. So there is value in revisiting the subject matter on a regular basis.
So I guess before I'm going to kind of jump in and ask you a question on that same kind of concept. When you think of, when I think of workshop and program, and I came from a technology background where I did a lot of training. I implemented not only technology workshops but technology programs, and I think so much of these training and the idea of changing the way you do things, really those programs and workshops really were beneficial for teaching that change. When you look at workshop and a program, what do you see, like if you had to say the best takeaway that someone usually leaves from each one, what would you kind of say those would be from a workshop and program perspective?
Well, I was in a conversation recently with some leadership from an insurance company, and I asked them historically what their sales training had been as it Was it programs or workshops? And they said typically it was workshops. And I asked what were the outcomes, and they said, well, people would take a few nuggets away. Now, in the case of a workshop related to social selling, if some people walk away and say, you know what, I need to use LinkedIn more. Even that's, they've upped their game already just by that mere fact that, oh, I didn't realize the power. I delivered a program for portfolio managers for a wealth management division of a bank, and the senior leader from the branch said he did not realize the power that LinkedIn had. So that was his takeaway, which was great to hear as feedback. But I teach digital strategy at the university here in Toronto, and the course is delivered over a 12-week period, and we have practical applications. I have guest speakers, and I'm also sharing content throughout. But it's layered and it's compounded over a period of time. And the analogy I like to use is if I were a personal trainer and you came to the gym, I gave you a tour of the gym. I haven't impacted your physical fitness. But if you came back tomorrow and we worked out, and you came back the next day and the next day, we're going to see improvement over time. But it's only through the compounded effort that you see an impact.
Well, that's a good lead into question 2. So we understand the long-term benefits of adopting a social selling program, but are there any benefits to just hosting a couple workshops at your company?
Well, as I was mentioning earlier, there is value from the initial introduction, especially for leadership that may not participate ultimately in a program, but they want to understand if they're going to be the executive sponsor, what do their staff stand to learn, what's the potential impact, and ideally potential ROI if they're going to be a sponsor for it. So that's where a workshop and the exposure to social selling can pay some benefit. And as I also mentioned, the idea of refreshing content or information. When you think LinkedIn's been around for a decade, Instagram is not even 4 years old, and I incorporate things like Instagram into my social selling because there's insights that can be captured from people's behavior that they exhibit on Instagram as an example. So there's always something emerging and worth adding to the curriculum.
So what other platforms do you talk about in your training? So that Instagram, Pinterest?
Yeah. There's a lot of organizations that are sharing things like infographics, B2B-oriented content. If you look at Pinterest as an electronic equivalent or internet equivalent of Oprah's vision board, people give indications of what they're interested in, hobbies, etc. So those are some insights. Instagram, Twitter. Hard to say whether you get any insights from Snapchat unless you have a one-to-one relationship. But discussion forums. Google people first. See what their social and online footprint is all about, and you'd be surprised at what you can find. In a recent meeting with senior sales leaders, I went around the table and I went to one regional vice president. I said, I understand from LinkedIn, this is what I can learn from you. I understand from Instagram that you've met a football player that was on Dancing with the Stars. I understand from Twitter that you were a brave man teeing off for golf on January 1st in Vancouver. I turned to the next person beside him and I said, I understand from Twitter that you like dogs. She'd only ever tweeted once in her life, but she tweeted a twit pic of her dog. And they were all just absolutely dumbfounded. And there was another person at the table. And I said, you and I could talk about academia. He was the only one in the room with a PhD, and I teach at a university, and he actually had some affiliations similar to mine from an academic standpoint. And they realized that as long as I'm willing to spend a few minutes doing research, I can find some conversation triggers that would help me build rapport and trust with them and differentiate myself from my competitors.
Love it. I love it. Oops, you hit home for me. I mean, like that's I preach the philosophy of show you care, right? So you were going out of your way to show you care by, if you want someone to spend a little bit of time with you that you could hopefully lead to a sale, why aren't you spending that time ahead of time to show that you took the time and you kind of went the route? And it's interesting. I had a debate actually earlier today and over the weekend about the idea of how different how a personal brand versus a brand uses social media. And I think social selling is the interesting in between, where sometimes we act on and follow advice from a social selling perspective that brands do, and then sometimes we follow it from a personal brand's perspective. I have a really interesting startup here called Social World in Phoenix, and they actually are using Snapchat for social selling. So I need to get a use case and show you how they're doing that. But it's, for them, they're creating that relationship, and then once they have that relationship, they're engaging on that one-to-one, and even if it's a matter of sending out and showing you some behind-the-scenes things or some information that is pertinent, that is of value, I think it's a huge win. So I think that was spot on. I love hearing that, because I think that's the fact that you went to all those different areas and you went above and beyond. They only tweeted once, but not only did you hear what they tweeted, but you were able to reference that and kind of relate to them, because now they actually like, man, this guy took that time. I don't need to blow him off to go get another cocktail. I can actually continue the conversation. So I love that.
Well,
that's really good.
As a fellow dog owner, it helps. And there was another VP of digital marketing for an insurance company that I was talking to, and I drilled down a little bit on his LinkedIn profile, and I realized that he had a degree in industrial design. And I taught entrepreneurship at a art and design school here in Toronto. And once I referenced the fact of that common thread between the two of us, the dynamic in our relationship changed dramatically for the better. We had much different kinds of conversations, richer, not always about business, and that's where the rapport and deeper relationship was fostered. So it was fantastic in that regard.
Yeah, it's amazing when you can tap into other people's passions, and that if it doesn't have to be on what you're selling them on, what you even work on, but if you have a similar interest, if it's dogs, if it's the fact that you don't like wearing black on Fridays, like the idea that you're connecting, and making that relationship, it's I think that's the power. I think that's really where social selling takes a big broad step, because you're able to, if you spend the time and you create you use those one-on-one conversations, you can connect with people no matter where they're at in the world, and I think that opens up your opportunities to create relationships beyond just a foursome at golf or a happy hour.
Well, and you mentioned the company locally that's using Snapchat. I think you and I are aware of a company called VSnap.
Yes.
And I had referenced them in a tweet, and I think it may have been one of our previous chats here. And I referenced them in a tweet. They sent me a video like, hello, thanks for the shout out. They referenced my Twitter bio. They walked around their office. They said it's sunny here. I think they're in Chicago. Anyway, I shared it with my students in my digital strategy course. I shared it with others to say, like, this is how you make people feel good in 30 seconds or less with an email. So it was fantastic.
Yeah, the VSnap team is great. It makes my day every time I get a little thank you for whatever. They're always listening throughout the night. They do a really great job.
No, I think that's definitely the thing I think that's often overlooked. There's another app I know, it's called Movie Stream, and I thought they took a really interesting approach of getting a hold of me, and they are a video platform for Android that they give you a homepage, and very similar in the VSnap space, but they not only reference tweets and elements of what I do on a daily basis, but they were actually taking the video while engaging with me, so they were able to show that they were, I was just reaching out to you on Twitter, and I think that video angle, right now it's still underutilized, but the people that kind of take the step to use other platforms, even if it's I also like, Ted Rubin talks about looking someone in the eyes digitally, and if that's just a matter of cross-platform, like if someone commented on your LinkedIn post and you thank them on Twitter, there's just something neat about that idea that you're not just doing the lazy, quick win thing. So I think that's, perfect, and I think that's good for, the next question here we have for question 3. What fundamentals should a successful social selling program include?
When we were talking earlier about connecting today, the first word that had come to mind was accountability. Oftentimes, before I launch a program with a client, I'll work with their sales leadership, and I'll want to know, what are your corporate objectives for the next 6 months, regardless of social? And then I want to make sure that the program's aligned with that. I want to know what their individual sales reps, what their quotas are, what their closing ratio is. I want a level set before we start, because at the end of it all, if it doesn't indicate ROI and we don't have some sense that sales will be increased, then it's a bit of a moot point. And I want to be able to clearly understand how they measure how they're performing now, sales attribution, whether they have teams of inside sales reps, collaborating with outside sales reps, kind of inbound marketing. Really want to understand how do they do what they do now and how do they measure it, and then layer on the social selling program in an appropriate way. As far as accountability, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you go so far as to audit their existing customers to see what platforms they're on and what would be best for them to focus on, or do you just audit their current process?
Well, no, I'll look at how they engage their customers now, whether or not they're active in social, what their marketing team is doing, because we want to have a tie-in between marketing and sales. We'll look at whether or not their target customers are in social and in what ways, whether they are Facebook, whether they're LinkedIn only, or what maybe they are YouTube or Google Plus. Hard to say. So we do a bit of an audit in advance. We also look at from a, I'll call it, qualitative point of view. If at the end, the intent being at the end of the program that if there's a team of people, we want to elevate their personal brand and how they reflect the corporate brand and their respective social presence. And then from a quantitative point of view, we want to look at the results of their efforts. How many calls resulted as part of their social selling efforts? How many new meetings? How many, ideally, sales closed? I was part of a panel in a conference earlier this spring, and there was a financial advisor who'd come up from the U.S. who uses LinkedIn to mine his network, and he pursues a very simple model. He wants 4 new conversations per week referred to him from his network. That's less than 1 a day. And over the last 18 months, he's added 215 plus people to his network and $150,000 to his income. So if we can narrow it down from a quantitative point of view to those kinds of metrics as part of the program and the associated accountability, then most people are going to see success.
That's interesting. I mean, when you first were going through that data, giving the numbers, I was first kind of getting that like eerie feeling, like, oh man, someone's trying to build their their cloud score, right? So that's that whole. But then the idea that you're not only leveraging your connections, but you're also kind of building that one of my big fan of Phil Caminari, and he always says personal learning network, but also it's your group that you can not only collaborate but reach out to. And I think LinkedIn, not only with these new tools that you mentioned earlier, but I like the Connected app because it also tells you things like that you should probably reach out to someone on, and it's simple reaching out, and that later on down the road when you do ask for that warm hello or that connection, I think those are great. And I think when I think about social selling programs and some of the fundamentals, I think so much of it goes back to like would you go up to someone, hand them a business card, and walk away without ever knowing them or introducing yourself or saying hi? No. So why would you send out an email to someone that you've never connected, never met, never even reached out to individually? You wouldn't. You shouldn't. And and there's some. I believe that not everything fits every situation. Where there's sometimes that makes sense. But I think people too often get turned off by saying, I don't want to accept every connection. Well, you should share connections that are just someone that's blasting. If someone's getting to know you or wants to get to know you on the next level and took the time to kind of connect and build that rapport, then they should. So I love hearing that fundamentals transferring from offline to online, just like garbage in, garbage out.
Well, the same gentleman, when he gets a referral, sends a physical piece of mail offline with a box of chocolates. So as a differentiator from all these other people, they're getting something physical in the mail.
Yeah. I mean, just getting something in the mail. I guess I keep those things around often because it's the little things like that go above and beyond. They tweet me all the time, but that I care so much more about, which is funny because how often do we take time to write a note?
Well, the same company gave me a T-shirt when I visited their office in Chicago, and it came in real handy when I was running out of clothes because I got stranded in Chicago for 2 more days than I thought that I was supposed to be. But I wanted to go back to comments you made about reaching out to people cold. Now, I agree, sending someone an email with a sale intent as part of the message isn't the wisest thing to do. However, I know for myself personally, reaching out to someone on LinkedIn, being gracious and to a certain degree humble, and just asking people for their time, being clear about what you want to discuss and the time that you're asking for, has paid a dividend. And my network has expanded for it, and it's by simply saying, "Can I have a few minutes of your time to learn more about you and the work that you do?" You'd be surprised at how many people are willing to spend a few minutes by phone, Skype, or Google Plus, whatever, as long as you ask appropriately and are clear about what your objectives are. And the other thing is the idea that it's not about closing on the first tweet. It's about establishing rapport with them, even just getting on their radar, and being human. I get questions all the time. Do you connect with everyone? No, I don't connect with everyone. But by the same token, if someone, it's not about whether I've met you in person or not. Here I am with 2 other people on this hangout that I've not met in person, but we're connected on a number of channels, and we've established a relationship, albeit in an electronic world. But as long as I believe that we can share value with one another over time, then I'm quite open to connect.
Well, I think so, on that same point, and maybe that you can, from me, with the idea of cold calling, which is someone's, transferring that to social selling. Cold to me means a random dialer giving me no information ahead of time, blast it out to somebody, and that poor sap is sitting at the dinner table and just wanting to eat dinner, and they have to go answer the phone. Like, I think of that as cold. So if you took the time to look at my profile, go to my website, reference, like you said, you're not referencing a dog picture in an email most of the time, but if you're able to show that you took the next step. Hey, Brian, I love this tweet. I would love to collaborate with you on this element, or not sure if you saw my tool, but I know you like this tool. That's not cold to me. That eliminates the cold element, and I think that's why you say you accept those people, because they provided value. But if it says you're a trusted person in my network and you've never reached out to me, like, that's the idea, I think, of cold calling. So I just wanted to clarify that. Do you see that side as well? Like, how often do you connect or send out an email and it's more of the colder situation, and what's the success rate of accepting and replying there from your experience?
Well, one of the things I talk about to participants in my programs is the fact that InMail, one, has a higher propensity to being opened. That I have a 5-star rating for InMail, so I'm already it's denoted to the recipient that I'm not a spammer. I'm very selective in my use of InMail, and I'm typically customizing every message that I send. And I tend to be writing to say, this is how, we may not know each other directly, but we share common connections in the following people, we're part of the same group, or we share interests in the following. And then I go into why there might be value in us having a conversation. That usually 90+% of the time works. And again, it's just being succinct, and as Mashable has said, using WIFM, what's in it for me, thinking about the recipient and why they would want to open their email. The other thing to mention about InMail, the analogy I've used, if I send you an email with my resume attached, cold, you don't know me, you're asking yourself, who is this person and why did they send me their resume? But if I send you an InMail message, my name is a hyperlink to my LinkedIn profile, which is essentially my resume, but I also have context. I send you an email, I'm not certain if it'll get through because I don't know if your spam filters will allow an unknown domain, but I know spam filters will allow LinkedIn.com through. My name is a hyperlink to my profile. You will also get context because you see the connections we share. You can look at my profile more thoroughly than all these additional touch points and added information that an email does not provide aids my social selling efforts.
Okay, bring it back to training. Which carries more weight, personal branding, network education, or tool education?
Well, I think personal branding is, if we want to call that the foundation, because most often now, especially in the social selling context, people are checking your profile out first. If I've either initiated to have a call with you, a meeting in person, or a meeting online, people are checking out my profile to learn a little bit more about me in advance of our conversation. And the same thing I'm doing about them. So to me, that's the foundational piece. And then the I'm blanking for this.
So I guess I'll jump on that. So give me a like experience for your side, like from a a personal branding. Like what? So personal branding is I'd say a hot button in every chat, no matter what the topic is. It can range from and I think it goes back to like people want to know what personal branding success is and like what little wins did you gain to where you started. So give me an experience you had or something that you've done from a personal branding that really helped.
Sure. A recent example was someone was checking out my profile several times over a few days, and I reached out to her and I said, and I liken it to someone walks into a store and the first thing that the salesperson says is, "Can I help you?" So I reached out to this person and said, I noticed that you visited my profile several times. Can I be of any help? And it turns out she was a producer of a conference to happen here later in the fall. And my profile had come up in her research about to be a potential speaker or panelist for her show, her conference. So if it weren't for establishing my personal brand and my presence with the right keywords and the right kind of content related to social media and social enterprises, she wouldn't have found me.
No, I think
nor would I have had the opportunity to be a participant in the conference.
And I'll even go a step further that you went and checked to see who was viewing your profile, right? So I mean, you took the action and initiative yourself. I think too often we think of personal branding as just like I'm going to make my name the same across every social platform. I'm going to have, I'll make sure. But then you forget about the the listening aspect, the engagement aspect yourself. Even I mean, I love that feature on LinkedIn that I make sure that everyone can see who. Make sure that they see me as the person checking their profile, and I love being able to see who sees my profile. Much like, I mean, how much SEO value when someone comments on your blog, you then know who and their own insights on your blog. Hopefully, it doesn't say cool or good job, because what value is that? But that's a whole other rant on comments. But like
with a link.
Yes. With a, have you read mine or
exactly.
Do you share mine? Like, yes, but I think that you kind of referenced a good point there where you're talking about what you were doing. You were proactively looking at your profile, proactively reaching back out, and that's important, I think, from a personal branding perspective. That's and so the question talks about network education and tool education. So do you have, from a tool education perspective, have you even from both of them, have you taken, gone to formal training or provided formal training yourself on either one of those areas where, like some of the social selling tools? I mean, the ironic part about this chat is that my first social selling tool instructor or person that helped me out is Rachel, who's the co-host with me now, is when she was with her last company and she reached out and said, hey, do you need any help on this or did you see how this works? And so she gave me a walkthrough on that. So just curious what tools or what trainings you've been to that could provide value that we should tell other people to join.
Well, just to finish off on the network education piece, that example of reaching out to that person viewing my profile is one aspect of the under the umbrella of the network education. Is the personal brand I'll talk about is really kind of passive for me. If I have a digital footprint based on all the blogging and contributions and comments and so on, that's my digital footprint working passively for me, my LinkedIn profile, etc. But by proactively outreaching to people who've looked at my profile, outreaching to people that might have shared content that I've authored to thank them and acknowledge them, that's the proactive expansion of my network and the proactive engagement of my network that pays a dividend. And as far as tools go, that outreach is, as well as the personal brand building stems from a variety of tools. Rachel was instrumental in helping me learn about tools. For me, it started really, really early on. I learned more about Twitter from Twitter itself than anywhere else. In the early days, when they used to talk about, I would watch how people were tweeting, what tools they were using, and that's really where I got started. I had worked in software before for a Microsoft solution provider, and I was always getting the latest beta software to my desk every single month. So I was always keen and curious to see what was new coming around the corner. And the same thing now in social. I'm always trying the latest tools for listing, the latest tools for management, and just managing the flow of content, more proactive listing, more strategic listing. And so, I mean, there's too many to list. I've shared blog posts before about some favorite ones, but a tool loved is a tool used. So it still comes down. Everyone has their personal preferences about whether they like TweetDeck or Hootsuite, or Tweetbot versus Twitter, or different tools. And some, I wrote a blog post about tools that I've loved that actually didn't come out of beta. They were in beta, and then they either shelved them or they pivoted, and they were no longer serving the purpose that I had originally fallen in love with them for.
I mean, I like that. I'm from the camp of that you don't have to hate another tool to love the tool you use. And that sounds like a Beatles song or some kind of song there for a second. but like
skills, love the one you're with.
Yeah, there you go. See, that's where I was going there somewhere. And it's funny because I'm doing a hangout with we're going to talk Hootsuite versus Buffer, and just the conversation was there was a blog post about it, and I refused to answer the verse because I'm a user of both, and I use them for different elements. And I think so much of that is what we do. And you also had an interesting topic or comment there where you were talking about the tool loved and embracing new technology. And I know like tools like social CRM tools. So we have like the pipeliners and the tools that are really changing. We don't have one of those to lean back and reference. I always talk about me being a change evangelist, and I think unfortunately most companies don't have what Rachel does. They don't have chief listeners. They don't invest in that listening aspect, because the reason that tools in these companies that are really doing well with social is because they don't have to ask you what your problems are with your tool. They're listening, and then they just kind of provide you the solution. I know Rachel can probably elaborate on that more, but I mean if all these tools companies employed a chief listener, I think we would be better off from a tool perspective.
Well,
for sure. And you can ask. I see some of my colleagues here on the chats, and we're always looking for new tools and ways to amplify our message and just to scale, because that's such a hurdle these days, especially we're a startup, so we're always looking for ways to get an edge on our competitors.
Well, and I think, Rachel, you'll agree that it's not about listening for them mentioning a brand by name, but mentioning a problem or a need or
Exactly.
an unanswered question. I don't know how to articulate what I'm trying to do all the time, and sometimes, if by the mere fact that I've said something some way, that a strategic listener or a chief listener can pick up on that and discover my implied intent, that's where social selling and the supported or the social listening that supports it pays off. I had a client that was a travel agent, and showed them someone was posting a question to their network, not naming any service provider in the tweet, but that they had some criteria that they were looking for information. 5 different service providers responded to that one tweet. The same day.
Well, so here's a question I think for both of you, and I think it's more from my angle where we're talking about chief listeners, we're talking about listening, but if a team doesn't have a social selling person that understands the listening, like how do you leverage the knowledge that Rachel consumes, or the knowledge that you get from a sales leader, and get that to the rest of your team? Because too often I think we have people that are really good at listening and hearing, are really good on social. Just we suck at collaborating and communicating across a company, especially empowering our sales team. I used to call it sales intel. And I would send them an email, and it would just say social intel in the subject, and I would have screenshots, and it would be like, hey, this is my. But I think, what's your guys' experience in that world?
I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about, in the work that I've done with enterprise clients, it's about understanding how they do what they do now, the current operating model, layering social and the associated collaboration onto it appropriately, finding enterprise social media management solutions that fit their needs, so that, to your point, someone might be doing listening, but then can route, whether it's a customer service issue, a customer churn issue, or a sales opportunity, to the right person, and you have all the underlying analytics to show, okay, we track the following issues. Here's the resolution path. Here's the response time. Here's who it went to, and here are the people that are doing a good job of responding, and here's some people that may need some refresher training or what have you. But increasingly, you're going to see enterprises have to figure that out. Right now, when someone has a customer service issue, I don't care what your 1-800 number is. I don't need to know it. But if I know your Twitter handle for the corporation, I'm going to tweet you and say, here's my problem. Now the onus is on you to solve it. I don't care how your silos or business units are set up inside. You've got to figure out how to route my problem through to resolution. And this is where they talk about social media being a bit of a silo buster, because it's disrupting the way organizations and their business units are accustomed to working and handing off between units.
No, I agree, which is actually a nice toss to the next question. Who should attend social selling training?
Sales, marketing, their leadership, customer service and technical support. Not necessarily always, with this proviso of or under the umbrella of social selling, but to understand where the company is headed from a social selling perspective and where and how it might impact them. There is this idea of change management that's going to be tied to it. You are, in some cases, asking more of people, expanding their responsibilities and their workload, and you're not, and depending on the corporation, you're not necessarily changing the compensation structure that goes along with it. So you've got, you don't want to railroad it over the organization. You want to layer it in appropriately and respect the fact that, like I said, people's job descriptions are changing, and you want to leverage the work of the peers so that you have colleagues sharing with one another what's working, what's not.
Right. Let me jump in real quick. I'm going to cut you off just because I want you to go here. I'm Brian Fanzo. I have no sales quota. Give me a reason to go to social selling training.
You have no sales quota? Okay. So what happens at what are your corporate objectives, regardless of sales?
So let's say I'm in a position where I am customer-facing, community-facing. I engage with the community, but there's no sales quota, or I don't report in the sales stream. Like, that's my element. I like that you play back. Very well done.
So then you can look at qualitative things if you want to show that community growth around the organization, high level of engagement. If you can look at, have you mitigated customer service inquiries through other channels? Are you driving cost out of the operation? So it's not always about increasing revenue from a social selling point of view, but it could be driving out costs from other ways that you operate.
Love that. I love that it's not always the increasing revenue element. I mean, like so I preach and work with employee advocacy and social employees, and I was lucky I had a CEO a long time ago where he always said everyone sells, and everybody, the entire company sells. Everybody, bitch to moan or whatever they were doing, and then he's like, well, if you're sitting on an airplane and someone's talking to you about something, you're representing, you have your the sticker on your laptop, or selling doesn't always, although what we're trying to focus on is leading these relationships to sell. Like, if I'm building a really good relationship with someone in a company, and this has happened to me very recently, I had a great relationship with someone that's not even anywhere in the sales department or sales realm. They're a junior person, but because their relationship was so good, when that person reached out to me in LinkedIn, which was probably not the very best worded in mail, but because I had that relationship with the brand itself and I respected the person that was already making the connection, I accepted, replied, and thank goodness I did, because now I have a better product because of it. But that's good. I love to hear that, because I think that's where we're taking. We need to get more people involved in social selling that aren't just in sales, so that they can help empower those that are really good at doing what you do.
Yeah, I think it's extending to that employee advocacy. Like as you said, everyone's selling. They may not have a quota, but they are ambassadors for the brand. I'm working with a financial institution in the U.S., They have some analysts, industry analysts, and an economist. Well, none of them have sales roles, but they have thought leadership roles. And it's important for them personal branding and kind of a cascading of their thought leadership down to their sales force. Social selling is going to play a critical role in what they adopt.
So this is actually, I'm gonna pull in a tweet real quick. Justin Dorfman, I know from Tracker, is joining us, and he said he's seeing 3 pillars of social selling: listening, engaging, and building your personal brand. And I know that some of our previous guests would add the 4th one there, saying making the sell, right? So because it's the it's that 4th element that is the one that pays the bill and keeps the lights on. But I think that's a really good point. Like the fact that we're talking listening, engaging, and building your personal brand is often just telling your story, being easy to found, that so much of that is in that world. And I think, when we get into the next question here, we're how much time should be invested in successful social selling program? I love this question because we're always asked from a marketing perspective, how much time should I spend on social from a small business? How much time should I spend on a personal brand if I'm a leader or CEO? And this is a great one because how much time, and I'd love to hear if you have any experience from like the idea. I know I heard an old sales boss tell someone that staring at your Twitter feed is not the same return as staring at or going down and having coffee with someone at the local coffee shop, or going down and mingling at happy hour. So I'm just curious from how much time do you target from a social selling perspective?
So for a social selling program, typically 8 to 12 hours, spread over anywhere from 30 to 90 days. It's no different than what the equivalent of 1 class a week in a given semester at university. You can make it faster. The length, or whether it be short or long, of a social selling program comes down to the ability of those participants to absorb the content and start incorporating it into their daily habits. So some people, if you're as part of the program, are giving more practical application. One of the reasons we've gotten away from workshops is this idea of in between sessions, you want them to apply it in their work so that they come back to the next sessions with questions, with praise, in terms of what's working and what's not. And so everyone knows that people learn better through experiential learning. So you want them to apply it. And the other thing is, beyond the program itself, comes down to how much in time are they allocating in any given day. Now, you talked about someone saying that going down to the happy hour and mingling or having coffee with someone. I'm not here to say that you should stop doing any of that. What I am saying from a social selling point of view is that you can do a better job of it in terms of who you're interacting with if you've done a good job of social selling to arrange online who to have those coffees with, who to have that happy hour drink with, because you've learned something about them and reached out to them and asked them for their time. That's where people talk about. I wrote a recent blog post about whether LinkedIn is worth paying for or not. It's not to say you should spend all your time on Twitter looking for that sales lead, but if I, through a better use of my time and more efficient use of technology, am making the most of my phone calls and my emails and my meetings, I'm more productive. Using a social selling methodology by looking at one person's network and the connections within them and looking for referrals directly from them. In 20 minutes, I got 3 referrals. One was a sale, one is at proposal stage, and one is in conversation. So I got a home run, I'm on third base with another one, and I got a base hit. That's 20 minutes of my time using social tools and social selling methodologies. So yeah, that was in front of Twitter, and that was in front of LinkedIn, but with the right methodology, it pays a dividend.
So when you're working with a team, what sort of short-term and long-term metrics do you implement to determine success?
Well, we'll look at, going back to, again, qualitative and quantitative. I want to make sure that we've elevated everyone to a certain standard from a, I'll call it a digital presence, normally their LinkedIn profile. I mean, social selling isn't just about having a nice LinkedIn profile. There's no shortage of tips about having a good profile. But, I'm still, a lot of people think LinkedIn is the online equivalent of a chamber of commerce, and so they're not using it proactively. They haven't set the foundation. Some of their profiles are modestly complete at best. So getting everyone up to an equal level, not only for their own personal brand, but if they are a team, they have to reflect the corporate brand. It's making sure that marketing and brand are in the loop so that there's a certain standard being met. And that's in the then seeing early signs that they're adopting the behavior. Those are some of the near term, and then in the long term, you want to see that their scheduled calls and meetings are going up. If they're in the business of writing proposals, you want to see a higher volume of proposals. You want to see a funnel growing at the top, and more people at every single stage, and ultimately sales in the end. Or going back to what Brian was saying earlier, if it's someone who doesn't have a sales quota, what are the criteria for them? Is it network expansion, network engagement? Is it the reach of their content from a thought leadership standpoint? There's, again, you map out the metrics in the beginning, depending on the people you're dealing with. Make sure that everyone's on the same page.
No, I think that's important. I think and you also qualify. Like a lot of that comes down to, if personal brand's of value. There's no more bigger pet peeve than me that if you say your company's a digital social company, yet your CEO has one-halved his LinkedIn profile, right? So I mean, like to me, if you don't have the time to spend to even just do something as simple as that, why would I feel you've had enough time to listen and use social in a way that your tool would be of value to me? And I think that's kind of that element too. And I think the metrics is interesting. I think it, I think this kind of goes into really what we're saying there with question 9 with the tactics that you use for programs when profiling prospects, from a tools perspective, but also I mean like data and tools when you're profiling someone. What do you look for beyond just the the obvious Twitter update?
Well, I showed an example to a co-location company, someone that does a data center and outsourced hosting. And I showed them, I said, here's a LinkedIn group of CIOs that would likely be target prospects for their salespeople. 200 members to the group. I was able to learn that, I think about 15 members of the group had had Twitter profiles. We looked at how active they were on Twitter. And I found one of them that had attended a particular conference that he had referenced on Twitter, and then he had a list of pictures from the after party of a particular band, and he was praising the band in his tweets. But he had a profile on Twitter, a profile on LinkedIn, and a profile on Instagram. So my sense for them was, or what I was trying to convey to them was, yes, everyone might be on LinkedIn, some of them are on Twitter, but here's one individual who's the most socially active and the most forthcoming with information. And he's given signs about where and how he could be engaged. And again, that was 5 minutes work. So it's not just about what they're sharing on LinkedIn, if they're sharing anything at all. You can do some roundabout checks by finding out what connections you share and ping the mutual connection to say, this is who I'm trying to reach. What more can you tell me about them? Would they be receptive to what I'm trying to do? Pick the channel, and there's appropriate strategies and tactics for each channel.
No, I think that's great because I think that's too often we talk about our leadership doesn't have buy-in to social selling, or they don't use social media. But if you find out who they're influenced by, who they care about, if they're a fan of Richard Branson, if they if you bring up Mark Cuban in a conversation, they talk about he's the great CEO, he really does really great things. Well, he's not only active in every single chat and thing that goes on, is he's not only embraces social but embraces who he is. And if you leverage that, show those wins, I think that's a good way of getting leadership buy-in, because I think we need more executive. I can't remember. I think Vala tweeted out it was something like 14% of the Fortune 500 C-suite is on social actively, not lazy man social, by just having a half-done LinkedIn account and calling it being social. But we're got about 5 minutes left, so we'll jump into question 10. What's the biggest objectives you get for implementing a social selling program? So in the world of change and those that hate change, what's the biggest objective you get?
Just makes me think of that meme. No one has time for that. I'm paraphrasing, but usually it's I don't have time. And where's the ROI? Socials for kids. The list goes on. Or For the larger enterprises, we're still trying to figure out our social media policy. Or marketing tried some stuff, but it didn't pay off. There's there's a whole list. But typically, if I go back to that example where I had the senior leadership of sales around the table, and I was able to share with them what I learned about them from social channels, even as passive as they might have been, to be able to say, 4 of the 6 of you in this room are interested in golf, or one was academic, one loved her dog, etc. It's those indirect insights that can pay a dividend, or to know so-and-so is on the board of a foundation or is involved in a particular charity, so you can tap into their passions. If you are also doing some community work or are aligned in your charitable the kinds of charities that you support, it's looking for that common thread. And not to say I'm not suggesting that someone's be disingenuous. It's just people. It goes back to people buying from who they like and trust. And if I don't find some commonality with you, the likelihood of my feeling a rapport or feeling that you're trustworthy is going to be diminished, or likely not going to happen.
Yeah, I love John Golden posted on Twitter. He just said, the 20-year-old intern that ran our social media didn't do a good job, so we're not buying in. That's such that's such a thing that we all run into. That's a good point. I think that's often excuses, just like saying you're too busy is always there's no such thing as too busy. Find time for what you need to make work.
No disrespect to 20-year-old interns. They have a role to play, and we can learn just as much from them. But I was the head of social media strategy for one of Canada's largest banks, and my first meeting in my engagement there was with risk management. Working with senior level executives on a steering committee. It wasn't about let's tweet about the hockey game that we're sponsoring or whatever. They wanted to understand from a corporate perspective that this was going to be well managed. And that there would be a smooth operating model. And again, not taking anything away from interns, but you need to be able to give the executive leadership and sponsors a certain amount of comfort.
Well, it's that whole idea that if you're not investing in it, how do you expect the output, right? We'll invest in paid search, we'll invest in SEO, we'll invest in flying you around the world to do a meeting that you could have done on a video conference, but we won't invest in a social media or a chief listener or someone that's doing something there. I used to joke that I was deploying cybersecurity, and I found out that they cut our budget, and we were the cost of one tank for the U.S. military, yet they cut our cybersecurity budget, and then when security was breached, they can't figure out why. And yet we have millions of tanks all over the world, and yet you invested less than one tank in the program that I was deploying. So, I love the fire back the invest in it, because I think that's partially what we're missing. You're hiring an intern to do a community manager job, which is going to be the face of your company, and then you don't trust them enough because they're an intern, and then you put handcuffs on them and you don't get value. So I think that's interesting.
The problem is they invest in the familiar. I get the question about social media ROI all the time, and you can give a snarky remark and say, well, talk to me about how you measure what you do now, and how well it's performing. Or the more proper response is, I can prove ROI all the time as long as we're clear at the outset of what our objectives are and we design the measurement into it from day one. There won't be a problem.
Well, folks, we're at the top of the hour, bottom of the hour. It's 2 o'clock. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. It was an honor. I can't wait to reread the feed, and I have a bunch more of your blog posts to share out with the community. Any parting words to wrap it up?
Just have fun. I often say that social selling, or social media more broadly, isn't particularly complicated, but it is hard work. But let's not forget that you can have some fun at the same time. So have fun.
Social is led by the people that got C's in school, because we're not afraid to fail, but we're also not afraid to try new things, right? So I think that's I like the idea. Have fun.
I mentioned you mentioned Richard Branson. My favorite mantra of his: as long as I can manage the downside, I'll do it. So how about I leave it with that?
Awesome. Thank you, community. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Same bad channel, same bad time next week.
Bye.